Hey, it's Mark, back with another audio tutorial. And in this one, as you saw in the title card, we will be talking about levels. And I'm going to lay out a really simple way for you to approach levels and mixing by explaining how you can think of sound as foreground and background elements. And you can compose your mixes as you would photograph, or how you can take a photograph, but you're in control where everything goes. So let's hop into Audition and have a little look at some sound that I recorded with my phone earlier. It's just some simple voiceover with some sound in the back that we will create a simple and basic 2-track mix with. So
This
is my voiceover.
is a quiet neighborhood in Halifax. It's
Rah, rah, rah. So we'll begin with some simple topping and tailing.
terrible poetry.
So we will just top and tail like we normally would. Now here's a new step for you that you may not be taking, is that you should normalize your files, at least your voiceover. Normalize what you know for sure will be a foreground element. And this will be. And there are a couple of ways to do that. We can go Effects, Amplitude, and Normalize. And you can see here I've programmed the shortcut for Normalize to be N. So I can just press the letter N on my keyboard. I encourage you to program your own shortcuts once you get comfortable with that. I can also talk about some of mine if you'd like that as well. So Normalize. And here's how normalization works. It scans the file, it looks for the loudest or highest peak, and then it turns that up until it hits 0. So let's look really closely here. This is the biggest peak right here, around the 3.5, 4 second mark. And 0 would be either the ceiling or the basement. In this instance, it's the basement. So it will increase the amplitude of this file until that peak hits the bottom. And you'll see it right now. Now, in this case, it didn't turn it up a whole lot, but if you have low-level audio or audio that's sort of, generally recorded a little lower than peak, this is a really helpful function. And what it does is it brings all of your foreground elements in line with each other. So everything that you've put into the multi-track will just be 0 out of the gate. It's really, really handy. Big time saver. And as we go forward, you'll see that you start at 0, and then if you want something in the background, you just turn it down. You can't bring anything closer to the camera than 0. We'll make more sense of this as we go forward. So you have some voiceover, and I do have some ambience that I recorded from my balcony. So, if you like, this is recorded quite low. I might actually, instead of normalizing this, which will result in something like this, it's very loud and ruckus, which is not necessarily what Gentle Breeze Through Trees is. I may just eyeball it and just turn it up a little bit. I won't, just a little bit, to give it a little bit of presence in my mix that hasn't occurred yet, but there it is. So let's click the multi-track button. And we will just save this to the desktop. I'm just going to call it mix lesson, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that the sample rate here matches the sample rate of your recordings. That way you don't have to resample and have a bunch of extraneous files cluttering up your hard drive. So we hit OK. Here we are with an empty session. Really quickly and crudely, I'm going to just throw these 2 files in and hit play.
This is a quiet neighborhood in Halifax. It's Clayton Park, actually, and it's about 5:45 on a weekday in the middle of January, and it's as quiet as it is cold. And that is terrible poetry.
So there it is, just a little voiceover over ambient sound. And most of the time, if you normalize your voiceover and you record your background sound sort of like that, just off of my balcony, it's going to sound fine. It's going to sound fine. Let's take it to the next level. We should establish our sound for a brief moment. So let's move our voiceover out of the way and find a nice place to start. Probably not where I'm fiddling with my phone a little bit. Let's find an event. Let's see if anything happens. There's a car there. How about we end with that instead? So let's go and bring this back to about here. And then we can sort of get rid of all this. Now let's hear what it sounds like.
This is a quiet neighborhood in Halifax. It's Clayton Park, actually.
We get it. Let's hear the end.
That is terrible poetry.
All right. A few things that we can do, again, to take this to the next level. I don't mind the composition of our elements and our sort of picture that we're creating here. The voice is in the foreground. The sound is in the background. That's great. It needs a little bit of tweaking, though. So the first thing is, I don't like when things jump in on a hard edge like that. So let's actually use I guess that's the linear fade tool to create just a very, very brief fade in. And you'll hear the difference here.
This.
Yeah, it doesn't sort of just magically appear. It sort of materializes instead. And we can do the same thing at the end, except here, I need to look at this a little bit closer because I tail off in my delivery. And then there's sort of the car going by event. You can't hear what I say. So you do need to adjust your levels a little bit. Let's take a look at that.
That is terrible poetry.
It was terrible poetry. So here's what we're going to do. Let's rewind back to the start a little bit and actually use the volume envelope right here to bring down the volume of this block. We'll say -6 just to start.
This is a quiet neighborhood in Halifax. It's Clayton Park, actually, and
I like that. Let's check the end.
it's cold. That is terrible poetry.
Okay, so now, just by reducing that background sound a little bit, we've created some space for our voiceover, and it's a lot more clear. It's easier to focus on the voiceover, and this is what I want you to keep in mind, is that if the background is too close to the foreground, it all sort of becomes one, and you can't discern any of the details. So let's, you know what, I'd be inclined even to pull that down just a little bit further. Not much, but just a little bit more. Use your ears here. I've turned it down -9.
Very, and it's as quiet as it is cold. That is terrible poetry.
All right. So -9 seemed to work for me. Use your sound. It may be -6, it may be -15. Just make sure you listen. Now, at the end, I'm inclined to actually bring up the background sound a little bit. And for this, we're going to use volume envelopes. And I will touch on this in more detail in another video, but it looks just like this. You click once on the line here, and then you can bring it up here, back to 0. You don't need to go way up here, but back to 0. And the way volume envelopes work is that you're automating volume changes over time. It's just like adjusting the volume in your car while you're driving.
Cold. That is terrible poetry.
And now we need to create a nice little fade out. So we will block edge drag to remove the excess background sound that we're not using. Linear fade over top, just like that.
That is terrible poetry.
I might even make the fade a little longer. Maybe I might even change the shape of it. I don't know. I'm feeling wild.
Cold. That is terrible poetry.
I like that better. And you may even, here's where the next clip may occur in your story. You may have more voiceover, a scene change. I don't know. But this is your basic sort of mix. A foreground element and a background element with some volume automation. And I really encourage you to take the time to practice envelopes and know how to use linear fades and when to use them. And be really critical about your mixes. You don't want the background too close to the foreground or vice versa. If it's too low, it's meaningless. So that is that. Levels and mixing and a little introduction to volume envelope editing, which I will get to in another video. Look out for that, and I'll see you in the next one.